It's been a long week for the Celtics, a long week across the NBA. So today we've got the three-man weave all set to pass the rock. Coming up next here on Green with Envy. What's going on, everybody? It's your boy, Will Weir, locking in with the three-man weave. That means we got the coach, Greg Maneikis. We've got the leader of the Taylor gang, Adam Taylor, here, all present and ready to rock here on this Sunday morning as we record. For today's episode, we're going to do a new segment called Passing the Rock. And it may seem very familiar to a different segment that we've done in the past. Three things with the three-man weave. It is the same. It's just rebranding, folks. Rebranding here. We're going to pass the rock around. But first, let me bring my guys in here. Greg, Adam, how we doing this Sunday? Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon for you, Adam.
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Ready for the rebranding, ready to pass the rock, and just interested to see what you guys came into this pod with, because I had like 10 different things that I could have talked about, and they were all Celtics related. So I'm excited just to see, where this conversation goes.
I'm very happy. It's a Sunday and there's basketball today. I've got questions.
That's right. You got questions. I hope Greg and I have answers for whatever your questions are. And I hope you've got any answers for whatever questions Greg and I might have. Quick programming note. So if you're watching this on YouTube and you're looking for a recap of whatever happened in that Celtics Hawks game, go ahead, scroll down, game recaps. Myself, Greg, will have you covered post game. I've listened to the audio version of this. We will have had that covered at the top of the podcast. But before we jump into passing the rock around, we do have a quick announcement that we want to make. The boys here with Green with Envy, we're starting a Discord page. We want to hear more, and we want to be more connected to the listeners of the show. We want to know more about what you're vibing with, what you're not vibing with, have more direct conversations with you all. It can get a little bit cluttered on Twitter, Instagram. So we wanted to start this Discord space. Adam, can you just tell us a little bit more about what people can expect when they get into the Discord?
Yeah, so it's just a standard Discord channel. It's completely free, so there's no barrier of entry. We're not asking anybody for any money. We don't plan on asking anybody for any money. Just to preface that, because I know some people will be like, you need to subscribe to get it. No, if you scroll down into the description of this episode, the link will be there. You jump in there, it's going to be other Celtics fans, other people that jive with the podcast. Some people would have come here from Twitter. Other people would have come here from, maybe they were on Celtics blog when the show was there and they found it through that way. Instagram, people just from all over social media that just big Celtics fans that fuck with the show. There's different channels available. So the Celtics Talk, we do some trade chatter, some rumor mill, some news updates. If you jive with the X's and O's stuff, I'll be posting some breakdowns in there that maybe I won't cover in written form, or I won't be posting on social media. And then now and again, we will do some Q&As that are off air, just on the Discord channel. Sometimes it will be Will on his own, Greg on his own, me on my own. Maybe sometimes it's two of the three of us or three of us. But look, it's free, and it's just another way for us all to get to know you guys and girls, and just to kind of build a community around the show. And obviously, then if you're worried that you're going to miss episodes, we got you.
And if you are joining the Discord channel, please, when you join, let us know that you came from the pod. We would love to see how many pod listeners end up in our Discord channel, so that we can kind of give you more direct feedback and direct conversation based off of what we talk about in Discord. But we want to see those pod listeners when they come into the Discord. Please let us know you came from the pod, and that would mean a lot.
Yeah, we're excited for it. So make sure that you guys can find this link. It's going to be on all of our YouTube videos. It's going to be on every podcast that we post, Spotify, Apple. If you're one of these hipsters that has one of those other platforms, I don't really know what those look like, but I'm sure the links are going to be in there as well. So you can go down, find that in the description. And then if you go to any of our bios from @GreenMVPod, Adam Taylor's, look at IG, look at Twitter, we'll have them available in there as well, or they'll be on the link tree. So just make sure you're checking those out. We'll be promoting it more publicly, but we want to start here just with y'all, the podcast community. It's our little secret right now. So we want to see who comes and joins us. So come have some influence on the show. Come have some fun. It'll be a good time. With that, Yeah, it's been a fucking long week. I'm gonna be real. So, but with Thanksgiving, it feels like the Charlotte game the Celtics played was like 2 weeks ago. That was within the last couple of games that they've played. You know, that was less than a week ago that they played Charlotte in that brutal overtime loss. So I feel like we got a lot of things between the Celtics and the NBA that we can really catch up on. So let's get going here with our Passing the Rock segment, just like you do in the 3-man weave. Of course, we are the 3-man weave, so it only makes sense. So we're going to do this kind of snake style here until we run out of stuff to talk about, until we run out of stuff to pass the rock with. So, Greg, let's go to you. Then we'll go to me. Then we'll go to Adam. Adam, you'll go back to back with any topics that you might want to hit. And then we'll just keep going until we feel like we run out of steam. So, Greg, lead us off. What you got for us?
You know what I'm going to talk about right off the jump. The Jaylen Brown scapegoating has just got to stop. It's getting to an all-time fever pitch. Although I am a JB stan, I do think that I am a realistic stan. I'm not just going to sit there and tell you Jaylen Brown's the greatest player on the Celtics, that he's a perfect player, that he doesn't need anything to work on. Jaylen Brown has a lot to work on to reach full potential. As we saw 2 games ago, Jaylen Brown had arguably his best game as a Celtic all-around game with his defense, his playmaking, the 2-man game with Porzingis, just making the right read throughout. We saw what Jaylen Brown can be. Didn't see a lot of people giving him his flowers after that game. And then when he has such a horrible second half in the previous game, against the Magic, you know, all the haters start crawling out like all the freaking orcs when they're going through the mines of Moria and Lord of the Rings, right? It's just like, what is it about Jaylen Brown that has made him so polarizing? Is it just the contract? Is it his outspokenness just outside of the basketball court? Is this like the shut up and dribble crowd that's coming out for Jaylen Brown? Like, what is it about Jaylen Brown that has made him the new scapegoat in Boston? Because I don't think it's fair. I don't think the criticism of Jaylen Brown is rational. I think that people are pretty polarized on Jaylen Brown right now. And I just was very I was upset after the last game to see how many people were just like, it's time to trade Jaylen Brown again because he had a bad half.
Okay, so I feel like I'm a good juxtaposition here because I'm lower on Jaylen Brown than most. I'm still higher on him than the majority of outspoken people, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm a bit lower on JB than most people. I like the fact that he's outspoken. I want him to continue doing that. I think that he's one of the leaders at the minute in encouraging athletes to use their voice. That's a good thing. It's not there should be no negatives associated with that. So I want to preface that to begin with. And other people are going to feel a different way, but for the most part, I think that everyone can see the value there. My issue is, and again, I'm not part of the trade Jaylen Brown crowd either, but I feel like he's become more sticky this year. So by that I mean, you know, some tunnel vision kind of appears out of nowhere sometimes, doesn't really flow within the offense consistently. A lot of his shots come at the expense of the ball movement. A lot of his mistakes come through on defense, come through switching off. And we've spoke about this at length. I think he thinks faster than he acts, or he acts before thinking, or however it is. And then for me, one of the things that really put me off was I remember a few years back when he was like, oh, Celtics fans love to call out the team. Now I'm calling you out. We need you to be loud and stuff. And I got it, but it felt a little bit salty at the same time. Like, why everyone's always calling us out. Jaylen seems to be the one that sometimes it feels like he doesn't like the expectations and what comes with being a player. And I think that rubbed a lot of the fan base up the wrong way a few years back. And they've been now with this new contract, and he's having a bit of an inconsistent start to the year. That's giving people a platform to air some frustrations out. For me, I just think he needs to be played more within the system. That's the only downside for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your question, where do these criticisms, why do they come out, and why do they come out so, you know, so vehemently, right? Especially in a moment of angst for the Celtics. And I do think a big part of it this year is tied to the contract, right? I think whether it's fair or not, I think it's totally unfair. And this is something, Greg, you and I were shooting around yesterday. I was telling you, but it's like from the moment he signed it, he was never going to be able to live up to that contract. So I think holding that against him is something that is completely unfair, because it's the market rate, right? Like Mike Conley at one point was the highest paid player in basketball history. That was the market rate. Mike Conley has been a very good point guard in this league for years. No one's ever going to sit here and tell you that at any point in his career was he even the best point guard, never mind the best player in the league. But that was the going rate at that time. And even next year, because by the way, Jalen's contract hasn't even officially started yet. But next year, when that contract actually kicks in, I believe both Giannis and Anthony Davis yearly value will actually surpass what Jalen's yearly value is, but just his total contract will still be the highest. So I do think that that's part of, and that's unfortunately kind of part of the history of Boston. You sign a big contract, all of a sudden expectations change, right? I mean, you even look back to Al Horford when he first signed with the Celtics. We've used this example before. Greg and I living, down here in Austin, Texas, before we had the podcast, we were just watching Al in our own little bubble, just like, oh man, Al's killing it right now. Look at the screens he's setting. Look at the ways he's influencing the game on the boards. Look at the way that he's managing the defense, calling everything out in the back line. We were thrilled. We came home. I remember it was that first round series against the Bulls, and it felt like some of our close friends who we just didn't know at the time had been like somewhat warped their minds towards like some of that Boston narrative of what he's got this big contract. Why isn't he 20 and 10 every night? That's never Al Horford's game. That was never going to be who he was. But because he got a, I forget what it was, $150 million contract, $140 million contract, all of a sudden the expectation was this guy's going to play like Shaq. No, not every guy that has that contract plays in that way. So for Jaylen Brown, I do think that that's always going to be a part of it. And I don't think that's fair. From what's actually happening, a lot of the Jaylen Brown conversation resurfaced with both Zach Lowe and Bill Simmons and Kevin O'Connor having conversations about Jaylen Brown in the last week. Of course, that led to, Greg, as you talked about, his best game that he had all season against the Bucks, and really the best 6 quarters when you include the first half against Orlando. Let's kind of forget that second half, but those 6 quarters of basketball were really, really good. And, with that conversation, I think the thing that I look at with Jaylen Brown is that it's still kind of figuring out where his spots are with this team. And he's developing that chemistry with Kristaps, but I still think it's a little bit of, and this is the Celtics as a whole, when is it time for when one of these guys has it going or needs to step up and you need to reshuffle the deck for a particular game as to who's the top dog? I don't think they've quite figured that out yet. And I just think you're seeing some growing pains. And I do think for whatever reason, the light is shining a bit brighter on Jaylen, probably in part to the contract.
Right. But I also think with Jaylen, a couple things in the Magic game, right? Because that's where the most recent example of Jaylen Brown getting tunnel vision, Jaylen Brown playing very poorly in that second half. He was not good. I described his performance as abysmal in the second half. And yet people were still, when I put out my grades on Twitter, people were like, how do you not give Jaylen an F? It's like, okay. Like
and you gave a C- or a D?
I gave him a C- because he was great in the first half. He was great in the first. Hey, as someone who never got a C in their life on a report card, like a C- is pretty bad. Okay.
All right. Easy with the humble brags over here. Easy.
So I think with Jaylen, right, against the Magic, my takeaway was that Tatum, first of all, didn't show up until the last 5 minutes of that game, right? He had a basket on Jalen Suggs early in the game. They very quickly switched sides onto JT, and then he didn't want the ball. Like the moment he saw Jonathan Isaac in front of him, he was just like, this reminds me of Andrew Wiggins in the finals. Don't give me the ball right now. I don't want it. And to me, Jaylen, normally he starts off the game so well in the first quarter. He's a great first quarter player. And at some point in the game, normally, late second quarter, third quarter, Jayson Tatum kind of takes over and then does his thing towards the end of the game. Then the Celtics are either up by 20 points and they blow a big lead, which I'm sure we might talk about here, or we end up like figuring out a way to pull it out down the stretch. But with JB, Tatum didn't show up until the last 5 minutes of the game. So, when you're playing against a team like the Magic, Derek White's kind of limited. Porzingis goes out. You're looking around, you're like, who can actually create against all of this size and length? And I think that's where like having the system and going to the coaching and calling those timeouts to set something up is a possibility. But the Magic are so good on defense. To me, it felt like Jaylen was looking around. Tatum didn't want the ball. Derek White couldn't really create against all that length. Porzingis goes out and Jaylen's like, I guess I got to do it. I'm not going to be scared to shoot the ball because nobody else really wants to shoot the ball right now against his team. So to me, that's what it was with Jaylen and Joe leaving Jaylen in despite him airballing shots in the third quarter. You know what I mean? Like Jaylen needed a break. He was tired. And Mazzulla was like, he's the only guy that's really trying to do anything and can't even get a shot off without turning the ball over. So that's kind of how I saw that. And he missed every shot. I thought most of those shots were bad shots in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wouldn't want those shots just in a normal flow of the game, but each game is its own entity. And I felt like in the Magic game, that was kind of separate to me from all the other Jaylen Brown issues. It was like Jaylen looked around and said, I kind of need to be the guy. And then he had to create his own stuff, and it just didn't go down in the second half. So I didn't have quite as much of a problem with Jaylen Brown in that Magic game, but I do think it was, people, when you are looking for something specifically and looking for Jaylen Brown tunnel vision, you could look at that game against the Magic and be like, oh God, Jaylen Brown, like why are you still doing all this stuff?
So real quick to that point, because this is one of the notes that I had here to potentially talk about. And it's, while a lot of the conversation does focus on Jaylen Brown, some deserve it, some not. Should we be having more of a Jayson Tatum conversation about why the Celtics have not looked so great over their last 5 games or so, right? Like, if you look at the last 5 games from Jayson Tatum, Greg, you talked about just anecdotally, he's not aggressive enough at certain times. Even the Charlotte game where he scored 45 points, you look at the end of that game, we're running Sam Hauser, Drew Holiday, pick and roll. And like, I get it. That might be a coaching thing, but at the same time, like if you're Jayson Tatum, you need to go demand the ball at a certain point at the end of that game and bring it home. This is your night. And we didn't really see that. And you look at the last 5 games from Tatum, plus minus, not the greatest statistic, but he's a negative in all 5 of the last games the Celtics have had. He had that one time in the previous games all throughout the season in which he was a negative plus minus. And he's been plus minus king. Every broadcast you watch on NBC Sports Boston, they're going to tell you about the plus minus king himself, Jayson Tatum, and where everyone else in the Celtics ranks. And so you look at Tatum just over these last 5 games, he's only, I say only because this is the area that he lives in, he's only averaging 26 points per game. He's only 4 assists to 3.6 turnovers. Who does that sound like? That sounds a lot like one of the massive criticisms that Jaylen Brown always gets. Well, he's 1-to-1 turnover to assist. I mean, we're not really making that same, stink over Jayson Tatum having that in the stretch as well. And, he's only shooting the ball 19.2 points, 19 times a game here. So that speaks a little bit to the aggressiveness of Jayson Tatum. And so one of my questions that I was going to pose to you, and Adam, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. As much as there's a Jaylen Brown conversation, should there be more of a Jayson Tatum needs to do more type conversation as well?
Yeah, I think that saying no would be disingenuous, and that shows a bias towards towards not liking JB. And I don't think any of us on the show sit within that bias. Tatum's not been great. I think he's giving you a bit more defensively than what Brown is. I think we've seen Tatum's come up with some blocks. He's rotating quickly. He's locking down on switches. He's he's really navigating screens quite well. Offensively, he has been a little bit more passive. He's not calling for the ball as much in the post. When he is getting into the post, he's kind of passing back out and then becoming a screener rather than trying to back down his guy, get to his spot more frequently. One of the main things that's been missing, and I know we saw that dunk that got him a tech, and we've seen him hit a few monster jams, but he's not really driving the lane as much as he was to start the season. And that was a big difference for him. Everyone spoke about the post-ups, but one of the biggest changes was how frequently he was bully driving to the rim and, going through contact, absorbing contact, bouncing guys off those big shoulders and really funneling himself and forcing himself on that low line defense. We're not seeing that as frequently. And as you said, he's not calling for the ball. I'm never happy when he takes a dribble pull-up from deep because that's just not his shot. He takes a fuckload of them throughout his career, but it's not his shot. He's a catch-and-shoot guy on the perimeter. And we're not really seeing him call for the ball there either. Part of it kind of feels like when the rhythm goes from the team, Tatum kind of ebbs and flows with that rhythm. And at the minute, the Celtics as a unit are out of rhythm. So Tatum's out of rhythm too. He's not the guy that gets you back into rhythm. He's the guy that you ride when you're in rhythm. And that's not great for the guy that's meant to be your number one guy, but that's just who he is.
Yeah, Adam, did you kind of see the same thing that I saw? Because I was going back and forth with my old high school basketball coach, who is anti-Jaylen Brown. And I was like, dude, you can't put that game on JB. Like at some point, Tatum's the alpha on the team. He's the best player on the team against the Magic. Like at some point, he's got to step up and want the ball and go ahead and like, the James Harden quote, like become the system, especially when Porzingis goes out. Did you see Jaylen Brown deferring too much in that Magic game? I mean, I'm sorry, Jayson Tatum deferring too much in that Magic game.
Yeah, and a lot of it, like Will mentioned, I think it was Will, it might have been you actually. A lot of it was because Jonathan Isaac was there, and people forget how good Jonathan Isaac was before he went down with his 7 gazillion injuries. He's an all defensive level guy when he's fully healthy and he's locked in.
He's a 7-foot Wiggins. That's who he is.
Yeah. He's a monster. And part of me feels like if Tatum's your alpha, not only should he be demanding the ball, he should be orchestrating screening actions to get cross matches, right? If you don't want Isaac on you, make Isaac have to switch. And if he stays with you, make him have to chase you, put him in motion, make him navigate on the perimeter. Don't just get the ball, go into a dribble package, realize it's not working. Now you can't back him down. Oh, well, forget this then. Someone else take the ball, your turn. That's not what this team was doing at the start of the season. You make the guy work, you make him switch, you make him navigate, and then you attack the spaces that are there. Tatum hasn't done that for a few games now, but the Isaac one was definitely the most telling. There was like, hey, if you're not demanding the ball, if you're not demanding those mismatches, creating out, like being the guy, as you said, being the system. If you want a screen, call for a screen. If it's not where you want it, escape, dribble out, and ask for it to be reset. We didn't see any of that, and part of that is a lack of patience from Boston.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because as I was watching that game, there were a handful of possessions where, and I know you referenced Harden earlier, but it felt a little Harden-esque where Tatum did try to get to that dribble package like you talked about, realized it wasn't working, and then does that Harden quick side pass to the corner, like, all right, I don't want this anymore. I can't do anything. And it's like, okay, cool. What does that do for our team? Like yes, that's a pass, but it's a non-progressive pass, right? Like there's nothing that comes off of that other than you just giving the ball to someone else, probably a Sam Hauser or maybe a Jaylen Brown in a bad position with less time on the shot clock in the corner, less room to be able to do something. So you're just hurting yourself, you're hurting your team. It's all around just a negative possession. And it felt like that happened a couple times while I was watching, that Celtics Magic game. And I think ultimately this just comes down to, it's a 5-game stretch. So once again, I don't think this is anything to go crazy about, but as this team is figuring it out, as maybe Kristaps is out for a couple games, looks like he's going to be okay with that calf injury. Saw a message on Instagram that he posted that he got good news. He is out for the game that's happening Sunday night against the Hawks. We'll see. But with that, Tatum, we talked about preseason. This is the Tatum MVP campaign. This has not been a good stretch for the MVP campaign. And so Tatum needs to get back to being that guy that is in that MVP conversation, because, and this was part of what I think it was Kevin O'Connor said with Bill Simmons, is that, yeah, Jaylen Brown can be better, but Jaylen Brown might be, who he is, and you're going to get some really great, you're going to get a few bad, but ultimately it's going to be more positive than negative. But where this team is going to go is ultimately going to be on JT's shoulders. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in this stretch, that he just needs to be better. Even if he's not been horrible, he just needs to be better. And that's where you're at. If you're a superstar, that's the burden you bear.
Yeah. I know we're doing this new segment, Will, passing the rock. So who are we passing the rock to at this point?
Let's pass the rock to Adam, because I basically jumped in off of one of your points. So
okay.
So yeah, I kind of left that as a hanging Chad there. I was like, let's see if anyone else has anything else to say about Tatum, but I think we've resolved that point. So Adam, the rock is in your court. What you got?
So I'm still going off the stuff that we air quote learned or came away with from the Magic game. So I want to focus on the Luke Kornett kind of narrative that's flying around there at the moment. Whether the Celtics need an upgrade in the middle of the floor, whether a trade needs to happen. Kristaps Porzingis goes down. Now, it hurt Boston more that they'd started this game as a double big lineup anyway, because if Porzingis goes down and you're starting single big, you just inject Al Horford into that starting 5. Horford is already there. Obviously, Luke Kornett steps up into a bigger role the minute you go double big, and now his role goes even bigger because you're playing single bigs and he's the second big. I think Kornett's had a few good games on the bats. I don't think he's been terrible. He's a good dribble handoff initiator. He's a reliable screener. I don't understand why he doesn't shoot from deep anymore. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, because early in his career, he was, I wouldn't say reliable, but he could knock down freeze.
He came in as a stretch five.
Well,
That was his kind of reputation.
Adam, like, I apologies for interrupting your point, but do you think, like, for me, when I watch Kornett shoot, I feel like he's developed a hitch in his shot. Even at
I
the
mean,
free throw
we
line.
don't see him shoot enough for me to have an opinion, man. I can't. When was the last time he
Yeah.
took a jumper? Do you know what I mean? But it definitely felt like that. Like it was mechanical. There was a load up as well. Like it wasn't smooth. It was like, get there, then we're gonna generate the power, and then there was a hitch at the end. But it definitely felt like it was segmented. And anyone that shoots with a segmented form is so easy to block and so easy to run off the line because it's just all about timing.
He is 7'2".
Gary Payton second just
He did
swatted
block
away
Wemby the other night. I did see
Wembanyama.
that, yeah.
There was like an 18-foot difference between both guys. It was like having fucking the guy, what's it called? You ever seen B movie? It's like having the B block Wembanyama. You know what I mean? Like the size difference is incredible. But there is a question whether the Celtics need to find an upgrade at the 5. Just as that third big, do you think is Kornett that guy? Should they have tried more to get Daniel Tice? I know you couldn't really pick him. Could you have got Daniel Tice? Yeah, because he wasn't making more than the
I think he was around. He's around. He was like 12 million. I think is what his contract, 12 or 13. So it is a little bit more than you would think. So it would have been basically.
But
like
as a second apron team, you can only get guys that were, if they've been waived, as long as they were earning less than the
well, yeah. Once he got waived, I don't think we could have got him. But yeah, I'm talking about for trading for him, we might have been able to.
I think he was marginally under the mid-level. I think you could have, because the Clippers are a second tax team too.
Mm-hmm.
And they picked him up. They're under the exact same restrictions as the Celtics, right? Could Tice have been any different? I don't think so. I think Luke Kornett gives you a similar impact to Tice, but with more size. Probably a bit of a better pick and roll defender as well. But maybe you need a bruiser because the Celtics got bullied.
I agree. But I also think Kornett, like, when we're fully healthy, I think Kornett playing that 8 to 10 minute off the bench role is fine, right? But the moment you saw Porzingis go out, and now Kornett has to be on the court because we committed to double big to combat the Magic size and physicality, and then they ended up just taking advantage of him and driving at him every time. I thought Kornett got exposed in the fourth quarter, but that's not who he's going to be, at any point when the Celtics are fully healthy. It's just a question, if somebody goes down, can Kornett can elevate his game into the second big? And he's never going to be the second big, right? So like, that's the question to me, is do we need somebody because Horford's old and Porzingis is injury prone?
And that's the question, right?
To me, this was the glaring hole of Grant Williams. Right. That's what screamed to me in this game. He's a small ball 5. He can also play, with Al or KP if one of them is out and be, elevated. And he would be in that rotation. But of course, financially, that was a tough decision. But I think this kind of leads me back to the conversation we had a few weeks ago when we were debating, do you go all in for Alex Caruso? Right. Because it'd probably take you 2 first-round picks, Peyton and whatever. And, those first-round picks may have protections, whatever. But Caruso's going to drive probably more of a return than whatever they get for Zach LaVine, which is crazy to kind of think about. But that is definitely a possibility. And so this is where I think, Greg, you nailed it. If Kornett's playing 8 to 10 minutes, we're golden. Like, there's no problem. Like, there's no need to sweat. Where you start to sweat is if in a big situation or a big stretch of the season, or when you get to the playoffs, if Porzingis or Al has to be out for a few games, can you get by with the team as currently constructed and Luke elevating to his time frame, or trying to find? I don't really know what you do, because there is not really a small ball 5 for this team to go to if they need to just buy some time. And so I don't know what the trade market looks like, but this is an area where I think, with the limited resources Brad's going to have, I think this would be the first area I look to get creative and try to find a solution on the trade market. What that is, I really don't know, because it's really tight, the confines the Celtics have to work with them.
But I think the question of, like, should we go after Caruso or go after a big, and like what happens if one of our big goes down and we did get Caruso instead of a big, that only that only becomes a problem against certain matchups. And I think the big thing with the Magic is they're just such a bad matchup for the team because they're just so big and so physical. There aren't too many teams quite like the Magic in the rest of the East, right? Even Milwaukee, even though they're huge, like their size is just like a different type of size, and it's not their entire they have Dame Lillard out on the court, right? You can always exploit a Dame Lillard. The Magic don't really have anybody to exploit. So like if we were to trade for a big versus a Caruso, I think Caruso, if against the Heat, for example, say Porzingis goes down or Horford goes down, I think that we can slide a Caruso into our best five there and be fine with it because the Heat aren't a big team, right? They're pretty small. Even Bam Adebayo 6'9". So I think it's just certain teams in which that lack of depth at the big man position could be a problem. And that's the issue though. It's like in the worst case scenario, does Joe have all of the pieces that he can throw out there on the chessboard? If somebody goes down, if our queen gets taken off the board early in the game, are we able to still figure out a way to get the other team in a checkmate?
Here's a question, just to kind of change the narrative a little bit. And it's a comment from someone on Celtics blog I saw yesterday. If you're on the fence, right? You're in the middle. You don't support the Celtics. You don't support the Magic. And you were asked, which team would you say plays a championship winning brand of basketball? Which one would you choose?
Just based off of that game?
Based off of that game, but based off of like the systems that they're implementing as well.
I mean, I haven't watched enough Magic games this year front to back to make, because I've just seen too much of the Celtics, but based off of that game, you would say the Magic. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one, but also, I mean, just from, you can see the way the Magic are trending right now. Like this,
they play
right
such a physical brand though, right? And this is the kryptonite that we've seen with the Celtics, that the Heat play physically, Boston fold. The Lakers will play physically when we see them later in the season. How Boston responds there will really dictate how the city and sports radio decides to treat this team for the rest of the year. You fold it, you know what I mean? The Magic play physically. You can out hustle the Bucks because, as you said, it's a different type of size. They're not playing that physicality, the type of physicality that really rattles Boston. The Pistons a few years back used to give Boston problems because they could rattle you physically. Andre Drummond feasts every time he plays against Boston because they rattle them physically. The length isn't the problem as much as it is the being willing to kind of slap someone in the mouth and bully them around a little bit. And a really good instance of that was that Banchero screen on Derek White. Like if White hadn't had his arm there, he still would have got knocked to the floor. It would have rocked him, but he just wouldn't have had the injury, so it wouldn't have become such a prevalent talking point for us. But that's the way they came into the game. We're going to bully them. We're going to push them around. And part of that is it's a championship type of mentality. It's that blue-collar hockey for a Mighty Ducks 3 reference. They clear up the trash around the rim. You know what I'm saying? So
that's a great scene. It's a great scene. But yeah, and even like, with the physicality, think about when Tatum had he had Franz in the post, right? And he hit him in the chest a couple times, that left shoulder, and tried to do his little spin back to the baseline and finish oversized. And Wagner blocked it. And he sent his shit. And it's just like a different type of physicality, right? And Tatum, when he goes up against a guy in the post that he can't out physical, like what is the counter? And if we don't have that, if we can't just go to a Tatum in the post, if all of a sudden Drew Holiday finds himself in a switch and he's like, oh, I've got a 6'7" guy on me, I don't have a 6'2" guy on me, I can't exploit him in the post, what are we going to do? And that brings me to another point that if we're still passing the rock around here.
We are, but before you go, Greg,
okay,
let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and we'll hit the next point.
Okay, we're back. Porzingis. I wanted to get into Porzingis. Okay. I know he just got hurt, but the Porzingis usage rate question I think needs to be asked. He's at his career low usage rate at this point. He's at 22.6%. His lowest usage rate before this season was his second year in the league with the Knicks, 24.3. Last year, he was at 27.3. Year before, 29.4. 22.2 is pretty low for Porzingis. he's shown an ability to, with the two-man game with Jaylen Brown, the ability to make passes. He's been a great post-up guy. Why are we not taking advantage of Kristaps Porzingis being just a better player than I think a lot of Celtics fans were expecting, like the casual fan? Me, Will, at the beginning of the year, I said by the end of the season, everyone's going to realize he's the second best player on the team. At what point are we going to trust Porzingis to do more for this team against bad matchups and just in general?
So this is something I was kind of alluding to earlier that I think is part of the issue with Jaylen Brown trying to figure out where he fits in, is that the Celtics are trying to be a little bit too nice at times about equal opportunity. You get this much and then you get this much. Tatum just reduce a little bit, Jaylen a little bit here. You know what I mean? They're trying to kind of figure that out. And I think with Porzingis, you're right. He's been able to do more. I think that fucking dime he had to Jaylen Brown the other night against the Magic, that was one of the best passes I've seen a big man on the Celtics make in a long time. And, we've praised Al Horford's passing. We've praised Rob Williams' passing, in the past. And, with Porzingis, what you're saying, Greg, to me, the Memphis game has continued to stick out to me, even though the Celtics won this game. That was a game where Porzingis was dominating. He was 9 of 13. I think he was like 7 of 9 in the first half. And that's a game where, to your point, when they have the mismatch with Porzingis, you need to fucking hammer that, right? Like, that game was 102 to 100, came down to the wire. The Grizzlies played extremely scrappy. They had no answer for Kristaps Porzingis. Biyombo and Jaren Jackson, they're two big guys, were in out of foul trouble the whole night. And, we talked about them having David Roddy, Kenny Lofton, just jumbo guys who are strong, but they're also like 6'6". And Porzingis can turn and shoot over the top of them from anywhere in the mid-range. And so it's games like that where, Porzingis has 13 shots. He needs 22. He needs 20 plus in that particular type of game. And this is where I think, right now, and I'm trying to pull it up here, this is where I think the shot selection or the shot distribution needs to get a little bit closer, where Jaylen's at about 18 and Kristaps is just under about 12. And maybe that needs to start getting a little bit closer. And I think that's one of my frustrations sometimes with early on with the Celtics team is, if a guy, and it's specifically mostly related around Kristaps, where if he has it going, or if he has the mismatch, or if whether it's him and JB or him and JT in that pick and roll, which I feel like we've seen a little bit less of over the last several games, we've been focusing kind of on that JB KP chemistry. Like, we need to just keep going to that. Like we need to hammer some of these schemes that Porzingis is creating these mismatches in. We need to go to them more until they stop working. And I think there's a little bit of a reluctance to try to feed everybody rather than just sticking with certain things that are working. And that's a Mazzulla call. I think this ends up being, something that falls on Joe Mazzulla's plate.
I don't think it's just with KP though, right? Like, I think we've seen Tatum have a hot hand and then barely get fed in the second half. I think we've seen Jaylen Brown have a hot hand and then barely get fed. And then there's been other times where they're force feeding guys that are cold. There's been times where Porzingis has had mismatches all night long, as you said, and he's not getting the ball. But then there's times where he's not got a mismatch and they're force feeding him to try and find ways to force mismatches. And I think I think part of the reason is, how easy is it to go and tell Jaylen Brown, who is going to be the guy that gets told this, by the way, hey, you're kind of the third guy now instead of the second guy, and you're going to need to take a serious step back. Right now, we want you to be the Andrew Wiggins for the Celtic, athletic Wiggins. That's what you're going to be now, a 3-and-D wing, and you're going to score, you're going to drive, you're going to shoot off the catch, but 9 times out of 10, the offense is going to JT and KP. How easy is that to go and sell someone that's literally about to become the most expensive player in the league, that's also the guy catching the most heat off the fan base, and now you're going to hit his confidence by demoting him in terms of offensive hierarchy? It needs to be done, and it should be done, but that could have so many kind of ramifications on JB's willingness and JB's motivation during games. He's already prone to making mistakes. Do you really want him overthinking when he should pass versus when he should drive? He's already making adjustments, playing this type of way, and being more of a scorer rather than a playmaker, with the exception of the Milwaukee game, obviously. How do you go about that without fucking with the guy and without risking him asking out next season?
But I think that's why the two-man game chemistry between them is so important as well, because now you're not looking at Jaylen Brown as necessarily deferring to Porzingis, but it's utilizing Porzingis to make the game easier for you. And I think it's just like a mindset shift. It's like if we play through Porzingis and Brown have this chemistry and they have this two-man game, now it's not Jaylen Brown. Like, I think it's selling Jaylen, hey, you're going to get buckets. You're still going to get a lot of shots. They're just going to come in different ways. But we're not expecting you to necessarily have to score in isolation. Think about it more as the way Jamal Murray plays off of Jokic. If he can make that change in his brain to utilizing KP and continuing that budding friendship on and off the court, I think that's an easier sell than just being like, hey, Jaylen, take a backseat to Porzingis. It's, hey, Jaylen, you're going to utilize Porzingis to make your life a lot easier. And I think that's why it's so important to get those reps and continue to build and not overreact on a game-to-game basis, because it's going to take them some time to develop that chemistry. And then, Will, to your point, it is interesting that we haven't quite seen as much Tatum and Porzingis pick and roll, right? The first game of the year when we saw that down the stretch, like, oh, that's unstoppable. Like, no team is going to be able to deal with that two-man game. We haven't really seen that much because they've been focusing so much on the Brown and Porzingis chemistry as well. But another thing with Porzingis is he's been really struggling from three, and
he has.
He's been terrible from three. And I think part of the reason for that is because so much of what he's doing is just like kind of being utilized as a pick and pop guy versus, hey, let KP eat a little bit in the mid post. Let's get him going in the post so that he can then feel better about his shot versus just play the Al Horford role and shoot 8 threes a game. But those are only 8 shots you're getting. Get Porzingis. Think about when Porzingis went crazy against the Celtics last year, it wasn't just him shooting 3-pointers, right? He was taking advantage of Marcus Smart in the mid post. He was taking advantage of Jaylen in the mid post. There's ways that we can weaponize Kristaps Porzingis to make his life a little easier so that those 3-pointers come a little bit more within the flow while he has a rhythm.
Yeah, just on that 3-pointer slump he's in right now, 16% over the last 5 games.
Lovely. That's what I don't want to see. Right, here's a question for you. So I've got up the assist numbers here. Who's passed to who the most on made buckets? Who do you think has the most assists to Porzingis on the Celtics?
I'm going to say Jaylen Brown.
Yeah, I would say JB.
Drew Holiday. Marginally. Jaylen Brown's got 21. Drew Holiday's got 25.
Okay.
Who do you think Porzingis has assisted the most?
I'm going to go Jaylen Brown.
I would say Jaylen Brown. We've been talking a lot about their two-man game. Yeah.
Jayson Tatum.
Interesting.
Okay.
Is it a wide?
Not really. He's dished out 12 assists to Tatum. He's dished out 9 to Jaylen.
Yeah. Okay.
So Tatum has assisted Porzingis on 12 buckets. Brown has assisted him on 21. Drew has assisted him on 25. Porzingis has also assisted. It's Brown and Tatum are the ones receiving the ball from Porzingis the most. He's only dished out 1 assist to Holiday, 1 to Horford, 2 to White, 1 to Pritchard, 2 to Sam Hauser. With that being said, who do you think is dishing out the most assists to Drew Holiday?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I'd say Tatum.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the answer. Is Jayson Tatum.
Yeah. Jayson Tatum is also the guy that's feeding Hauser the most by a considerable margin, followed by Al Horford. Jaylen Brown, I find, doesn't really look for corner shooters on his drives.
I would say this is probably the biggest, the most salient point about Jaylen Brown and like his tunnel vision is the lack of passing to corner shooters, especially Sam Hauser. It drives me fucking insane. I'm like, dude, he's wide. Sam Hauser is wide open almost every single time Jaylen Brown has the ball, and he just never sees him.
Mm-hmm. He's got 3 assists to Sam Hauser on the season. One of them
sounds about right.
One of them.
Oh yeah, locked eyes, and I said, "Fuck
it." 3 assists to Peyton Pritchard, who's usually floor spacing. He doesn't really kick out to shooters that way. He needs a roll man,
unless he's in the lane and gets in trouble in midair and needs to throw it back out.
Yeah, but usually then it's going back out to a ref.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or it's going the other way in transition. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the biggest difference between Tatum and Brown, right? Is Tatum, he sees the entire floor and Brown doesn't. Brown sees a couple of things on the court.
Well, you
and
highlighted that a couple episodes ago, right?
Right.
Like with him and Porzingis, he's finally starting to get a little bit more comfortable. And hey, my first read's not there. Be patient. Maybe the second read's there. And so we're slowly starting to see that develop. And Greg, as you were kind of going through, how this team is setting up the foundation or the building blocks for ideally what they want to see long term, it kind of reminded me of the Ime Udoka season. And early on, the defense just we didn't quite, whether it was the switches, we were doing it at the wrong time, trying to figure out what was happening. You saw some of the, the growing pains in real time as it was happening. And obviously we saw Ime Udoka's, coaching growing pains happening as well. And so it makes me, but then obviously that defense was incredible that made that run to the finals. And it took time to kind of build it up. They need to change personnel. That was part of it. But for me, it's, I do wonder if a little bit of watching some of these mistakes early on will ultimately, and this is looking at it, glass half full, ultimately, those are going to be the mistakes you make now. You'll improve and benefit from later on in the season because we're just seeing the growing pains now. And so then they'll kind of figure out some of these things about how to, balance this entire roster and team, because it is still only 15 games or 15 or 16 games into what is, a brand new grouping of these four guys that are your main four, still really getting to learn each other. And I think that's something that we also have to factor in when we think about, sometimes it looks great, sometimes it looks a little questionable, and it's still a figuring out process.
Have you seen the video that goes around social media sometimes of that soccer coach, and he's like sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit? Have you seen that one?
I have not, but I liked your impression of it, though. I'll tell you that much.
I'm going to send it to you because whenever I'm watching the Celtics and they lose, I always replay that in my head. I'm like, sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
Hey, Adam, did you have another point to make off the passes and the assists?
Not really. No, I was just kind of putting out there that I wanted to just make a point that there is a two-man game forming between Brown and Porzingis, but it's not as prevalent in terms of creating scoring as what it kind of feels like. Do you know what I mean? Like there is a two-man game there, but there's also a two-man game between Tatum and Porzingis. It's just not as explosive in terms of the way the baskets are finished. And, right. Tatum goes about his scoring profile a little bit different. There's also a little bit of a two-man game going on between, who was it? It was Drew Holiday and somebody.
And Tatum, I think.
Yeah, and like that's happening as well. And that's what you need, right? You need two-man games between multiple guys across multiple different parts of the floor. So the Brown and Porzingis one is one you can lean on. But again, I feel like that's such a straight line kind of ram it down your throat because no one's kicking out to corner shooters out of those two guys. Do you know what I mean? You need to have a little bit more flexibility. And one of the things I put in my takeaways on Saturday was there's no counters in this team at all. Like if you shut down what they're doing, if you shut down route one, there's no route B, no route two. You know what I mean? Everything just falls apart. And hopefully as they develop some more two-man games and they start to learn how to flow into one two-man action into a second, maybe we'll start to see some more. But at the moment, it's definitely a new team that's kind of been thrown together. And it was kind of last minute as well with the Drew Holiday edition.
Right.
And, because it looked good at the beginning, people thought it was going to be good all the way through. And it's just, that's not how it works.
Yeah, there's going to be growing pains. I would be interested to go back and watch all of the Porzingis to Tatum assists at this point in the year, because to your point, Adam, the Porzingis to Brown assists and the Brown to Porzingis assists are very loud in their highlight plays, right? With Tatum, I just in my head, I can't envision what a Porzingis to Tatum pass even looks like right now, right? Like with Porzingis and Brown, how it's happening. It's in that empty side two-man game that they're running. With Tatum and Porzingis, I can't even really picture it because they have seemingly been emphasizing the Holiday and Tatum pairing, right? They come off the court at the same time and that first sub and all that stuff too. It's interesting. I really like those assist numbers.
The only person to assist Tatum more than Porzingis is D White. Just to throw that out there.
D White's the man.
The only person, even Drew Holiday's assisted Tatum less than Porzingis. Not by a lot, but
All right. Well, hey, that's something we'll keep an eye on here just to see. I like the idea though of developing all those different 2-man games across the spectrum, right? So that you're not just stuck in, hey, this is our one go-to. Now we have nothing. All right, I got something else that I want to go to here for us, and somebody's got to do it. Well, you know what that means. It's the in-season tournament music, and let's be real. We might be running out of time quicker than we thought to be able to play that, because after the Celtics got their ass kicked by Orlando, they've put themselves in a really tough position that Tuesday night, they're still alive when they play Chicago in the in-season tournament, but they're going to need a lot to happen for them to continue. So just to lay it out real quick, if the Celtics still want to win Group East C, I believe is their correct group, they're going to need to beat the Bulls by 23 points or more, and then also hope that Brooklyn beats Toronto, but by less than, I believe it's 9 points is what they need to happen to win their group. And then if they want to get one of the wild cards, which could happen if Toronto is to beat Brooklyn, Celtics would then lose the tiebreaker to Orlando. They would just need to beat by Chicago as much as possible. And there's like a million different scenarios in which the Knicks lose or Miami loses or Milwaukee or Cleveland. And then you got to look at the point differential, and it's too much to think of.
But Forsberg had a really good tweet laying it out.
Yeah, there's a couple out there that will give you each individual scenario for Tuesday night. We'll make sure we get those posted for you. But I have a question just for you guys. Are we having fun yet? Do you guys like the in-season? Now that we actually have a sample set of the in-season tournament, we're coming up on the last night of pool play. What are your actual thoughts now that you've seen the product? Not just here's what I think it could be in theory, but what are your actual thoughts on what we've seen so far?
I'm English. I'm used to cup style games. I'm also used to it in basketball from EuroLeague. So I knew this was going to be fun. I didn't expect it to be as competitive as what it has been. I'm a big fan of the courts. Obviously, I'm not a fan that people keep slipping over. They need to figure a way to fix that shit. But overall, I'm all in for it, man. And I think that this is the first season. So obviously, it's going to get refined. It's going to become better. Players are going to, once this year's winners are out in Vegas during the summer, spending their winnings on whatever they want to spend their winnings on. And everyone else sees them and they're like, oh, we're just spending that in-season tournament money. This is like free money. Like Jayson Tatum's mom isn't going to try and say that's NBA money. You can't spend that. He's going to be able to go do what he wants to do. I think that players are really going to ramp up. So, Greg, you got a tweet on the screen.
Yeah, this is just the Chris Forsberg tweet that I was referencing. So, those of you that are watching on YouTube, this is just a visual anchor chart for you. Go back to my teacher days so that you can go ahead and read this at your leisure. The thing that's interesting to me about the in-season tournament that I'm just now figuring out is I looked at the Celtics schedule because we're about to go on this homestand, and I was like, oh, the Celtics.
In quotation, by the way, homestand.
Why do you say that?
Well, I think it's going to be the point you're getting to. I was trying to set you up here, but continue.
Oh, okay.
Hear your point.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I don't know how it's gonna work. So as the in-season tournament is going on, the Celtics are gonna have to, if they don't make the tournament, are gonna have to play 2 games outside of their actual scheduled games because they have a 7-game homestand coming up. But then on December 6th and December 8th, they also have to play 2 games against some of the other 22 teams that don't make the tournament. So this to me is where I'm getting a little lost with the in-season tournament. I've been a big fan of it, but now that I looked at the schedule and I was like, wait, they have 2 weeks off. And then I read into it a little bit more. I had to do a whole bunch of Google search and I ended up on NBA.com where it laid out all the, the in-season tournament explained page. And I was like, oh, okay. So that makes sense. They're going to have to play on December 6th and December 8th against 2 teams that don't make the tournament. But to me, this is like down the road. How is the NBA going to then now utilize this to make it more fun? Because you could do some sort of like full league single elimination tournament. Once people are used to the idea of the in-season tournament, maybe they can, Will, to your point that you made a couple pods ago, it's like the whole month of November is the in-season tournament, and they start to find more ways to get creative with it now that people are used to it and they're not like, oh my God, in-season tournament, how is that going to work? Which is kind of where I'm at now. It's like, I don't get it anymore. But I do think overall it's been a success.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And like I said, that's why I was saying, in quotation, 7-game homestand, because there's after these next 3 games, we don't really know if it's a continuous homestand. I think at least one of those games, if the Celtics don't make the in-season tournament knockout rounds, I think at least one of those was going to have to be on the road. Like you said, I don't really know how that part works. Well, I know it will be with the other East teams that don't make the knockout rounds, but who it will be and where it will be, I have no freaking clue. I'm just going to wait and see what happens on that rather than have to try to figure all that out. But yeah, I think there's no doubt that this has been a success so far. Like it certainly needs to get cleaned up just as far as now even those of us that have been talking about it and accidentally turning into hype men for it, even if like myself, who was not skeptical, but was just like, yeah, let's see what happens. Like it's hard to figure out now for those of us that are even in the weeds of this on like a day-to-day basis. That makes it tough to be like, oh, hey, there's just should be so much universal commercial appeal when people who talk about it on podcasts and write about it, and we're still kind of debating how it works within ourselves. Like, how can you then share that with your fan group that might be like, oh, yeah, if you want to tune in, give me the quick elevator pitch. Well, have you heard about point differential? Like that's not going to be like the easiest transition to it. But I think it's been a lot of fun, and I think the NBA is getting a little bit of what it wanted, which is, as we head into Tuesday night, the last night of pool play, it's kind of a mixed bag of teams that you will expect to be there at the end of the season and teams that are kind of up and coming. So if you look at the East right now, the 4 teams as it currently stands that would be in the knockout rounds: Indiana, surprise and up and coming; Milwaukee, people expect to be there at the end; Orlando, we've talked a lot about them, kind of a surprise, but also definitely certainly on the up and coming. And then you have the New York Knicks, which kind of always fall like in that, yeah, they're good, but maybe how can they take that next step? Exactly. And then you look at the West and you get the Lakers, who are a hilarious plus 74 in season tournament games, just a ridiculous number. People expect them to be at the end. Sacramento, they were the darlings last year. This year, kind of a little bit more middle of the pack. New Orleans, everybody wants to say, hey, can Zion and Ingram play together? No one knows. They've been on the same team for 3 years. That's still a massive mystery. Maybe let's put it on the biggest stages for November, December, and let's see what happens. And then you got Phoenix, who still doesn't even have Bradley Beal for a single game yet, and they're in that wild card spot. So it's an interesting mix, and I think it's kind of what the NBA wanted: is you get Giannis, you get LeBron, but then you get Paolo, and you get De'Aaron Fox, you get Zion Williamson. So you have this Tyrese Halliburton. Yeah, you have this nice mix of the old guard, the new guard, and some of the underappreciated guys all kind of coming together. So I think so far for the NBA, they have to feel pretty good, other than the courts being slippery, that this has been a pretty big success for them.
I really like the in-season tournament.
Yeah, it's been fun, man. It's hard to find anything against it. The one thing that when Greg and I first talked about it is like, are these going to be big games that really translate to, I don't know, man. Did you see the way Paolo balled out in that semifinal in Vegas? Like TBD. But of course, that's with anything that's new. You kind of have to wait and see. But I think on the fun meter, it's a 10 or 9 or 10. Like it's up there. A little confusing, but I think they'll figure that out. All right, we've gone kind of long here, but I'm having fun. This has been a great conversation with you guys. Do we want to hit any other topics here, or are we ready to wrap this up? How we feeling?
If I had a whistle, I'd blow it to get everybody down to the baseline. End of practice. End of the 3-man weave. Felt good about this. Passing the rock. It was fun.
Oh, yeah, I'm out of steam. I've ran too many. This was like running suicides in the gym.
Yeah,
dude. I'm done.
Yeah, I feel you. We got to save it here. We'll save some gas in the tank here for the next time we do Passing the Rock, which we will be doing throughout the season. But just as a quick reminder for those of you watching us on YouTube, and if you're listening on the audio portion via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, Discord page. Come join us. Come hang out. Come have fun. Link is going to be in the bio, or should be in the description of the YouTube. Going to be in the description of wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. Come sign up. Come have some fun. If you're watching on YouTube, Greg has that pulled up for you right now. Make sure that you join that space. Come hang out with us. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to continue to grow this throughout the year. And the larger we get, the more opportunities we're going to have to do some Discord-specific type things. So stay tuned for that. But that's going to be a wrap for this episode of the 3-Man Weave here on Green with Envy. It's your boy, Will Weir. It's the coach, Greg Maneikis. It's the chief and leader of the Taylor gang, Adam Taylor himself. Greg, any final thoughts? And then let us know what we're going to hear on the way out.
Black Sheep Optimist, get this high. Peace, everybody.
Deuces.